quickly to just introduce myself here. So my name is Julie. I am a registered dietitian. So I have both my undergraduate and my master's in nutrition science. I actually began my career working in outpatient oncology. So when I was living in New York City, I was working at an outpatient oncology unit there. And during that time, I specialized in women's health cancer, so things like breast cancer, and I also did a lot with GI cancers as well. Well, if everyone can just make sure to mute themselves. Actually, I'm going to do that manually on my end, just so it's nice and quiet. All right, perfect. So when I first got into private practice, that was about 4 years ago, I decided that I wanted to specialize in gut health. So myself, I have had a lot of digestive issues for years. When I was growing up, I always had stomach problems. And I remember my mom would say to me, oh, it just runs in the family. Whenever I'd get stressed, it'd go to my stomach. There was always something happening. And then as I kind of continued and I was getting my degree, all of my symptoms started to worsen. And it got to the point when I was living in New York City and I barely could eat. I had 5 foods that I could tolerate. There was a lot going on, but overall, I just wasn't feeling good. So I went out and I saw a GI specialist. Unfortunately, the response that I got was fluids and fiber, and it didn't actually make any difference at all. So I started kind of diving deeper into this world of functional nutrition, and that is how I ended up with where I am at now. Outside of being a dietitian, I am currently pregnant, so I'm going to have a little baby girl end of August. I am married to my husband. We live in Wyoming, so about an hour and a half outside of Jackson Hole, kind of close to Teton National Park, Yellowstone National Park. It's a very beautiful area to be in. Right now, we are getting a heat wave, so I am currently dying because no one has air conditioning out here. But I'm a big outdoor enthusiast. I have 2 dogs. Both of them are labs. We are outdoors as much as we can. And so, yeah, when I'm not working, I'm probably out hiking or doing something along those lines. So with that, let's get started onto all of the fun stuff. As a heads up, there is going to be an opportunity to do Q&A at the end. So just hold your questions till then, and I promise I will stay on as long as we need to go over any questions that you guys have. All right, so what to expect during this class. So first of all, we're going to dive into the common root causes of bloating. So these are the things that I think we don't think about as often as we should. A lot of times we just treat the symptoms. We're not actually treating the root cause, but when we can identify the root cause, we can then make sure that we are addressing these issues for good and not just putting a Band-Aid fix on them. Then we're going to talk about how to optimize digestion. And then from there, we'll dive a little bit into how to build bloat-free meals. And then we're going to finish it off by talking about some of the more common supplements that I recommend, why I recommend them. And then if you have any specific questions about supplements that you're currently taking or anything that you want to take that you might have seen on social media before, we can talk about that at the end as well. So what are some red flags of poor gut health? I know a lot of times when we think about gut health, we think about gas, bloating, constipation, diarrhea, but our gut is almost like our second brain. Our gut impacts virtually every single system in our body. So it's going to impact things like our skin health. It's going to impact hormone health. It can impact issues like Hashimoto's or other autoimmune conditions and thyroid conditions. So when our gut is out of balance, it can disrupt all of these other areas. Another big factor when it comes to gut health is actually immune health. About 70% of our immune cells are actually located in our gut. So if you want to focus on having a healthy immune system, a great way is to focus on gut health. So one thing I want to emphasize before we get started on these root causes is that just because a symptom is common doesn't make it normal. I think we kind of live in this world now where we have normalized so many of these GI issues as just being something that we've got to get used to. There are so many accounts that I see on social media. One of them is like hot girls have IBS, just kind of, it's normal for all these girls to have all these digestive issues or all these men to have these digestive issues. But just realize that you know your body best. And if you say, something is off, something does not feel right, then I guarantee something is off. There's kind of this false misconception that just because labs look normal, things are normal. Labs could come back looking perfectly good. Colonoscopy results could come back looking perfectly good. Endoscopy results could come back with nothing that they're seeing. But it doesn't mean that there's not an underlying issue that's more related to your microbiome specifically. So Just remember, advocate for your health. No one knows your body better than you do. And so if you're telling me that something is wrong, we're going to go with something is wrong. All right, so what is normal versus what is not normal when it comes to bloating? Some bloating is perfectly normal, and I want to make sure that we acknowledge that because I will say, I don't think most people can say that they have never experienced bloating in their life. For example, if you eat a very large meal, we sit down for Thanksgiving, we stuff ourselves with turkey, we're gonna probably feel a little bloated and distended afterwards. If we're having a lot of cruciferous veggies, things like broccoli and cauliflower and cabbage and Brussels sprouts, these foods contain a sugar known as raffinose, which is pretty heavily fermented in our microbiome and produces a lot of gas. So even someone with the healthiest microbiome might still experience these symptoms if we're having a plate full of broccoli, for example. Things like, chewing gum or carbonated beverages. If you think about it, anything that's making us swallow excess amounts of air is going to contribute to bloating because that air has to go somewhere. And so it has to essentially come out the other end, but in the process, it's probably going to make you feel a little bit bloated. For all the women on this call, menstrual changes. As we work through our menstrual cycle, there's a huge fluctuation in estrogen and progesterone levels depending on where you're at in that cycle. And so this change in hormones can actually cause a lot of water retention, and it can also contribute to bloating and digestive changes in terms of bowel movements. I would say, major changes in these areas are not normal, but it's pretty typical to experience some difference during that time. Last couple of things, I would say if we're increasing fiber super quickly, our body has to adjust to it. So we might notice an increase in bloating, or if we're introducing a lot of new probiotic rich foods, things like sauerkraut, kimchi, kombucha, anytime we're introducing new bacteria into our system, it can also cause some more gas and bloating. So if that is what is considered normal, what is not normal when it comes to bloating? If we are waking up first thing in the morning and we get out of bed and we are like, oh my goodness, my stomach is all kinds of distended, all kinds of bloated right now. That is a red flag that something is off. We should not be waking up feeling bloated. If we're going to bed bloated, same thing. By the time we go to bed at night, we shouldn't be laying there uncomfortable. Of course, this depends on when we ate our last meal. We don't want to be eating immediately before going to bed just because digestion slows. But if we ate dinner at 5 p.m., we should not be going to bed at 9 o'clock at night feeling really uncomfortable. If you're ever waking up in the middle of the night from abdominal discomfort, pain, or bloating, also definitely not normal. Painful bloating and distension, again, not normal. I think some bloating, there's a big difference between having an uncomfortable feeling, but then also being physically in pain. If you feel like every time that you eat, food is just sitting in your stomach and it's not digesting, almost like a brick that's just heavy and sitting there, again, that's not normal. Food is supposed to digest, especially over the course of a couple of hours. And then the last one I wanted to mention, because I see this one all the time on social media, is looking 6 months pregnant after every single meal. Being 8 months pregnant right now, I can confirm that if someone looked like I did right now, it would not be normal by any means. So if any of those are things that you're sitting there and saying, that kind of sounds like me, those are all red flags that your bloating would be considered abnormal. So what are the common causes of bloat? So first, we're going to talk about these common causes, and then we're going to talk a little bit more about the difference between upper belly bloat and lower belly bloat, because where the bloat is located can actually tell us a lot of information regarding what's causing it in the first place. So one cause of bloat is going to be fluid retention. So this is going to be more hormone related. Like I said, those hormonal fluctuations during your menstrual cycle can cause water retention, which can in turn cause bloating. If we're eating a diet that's very, very high in carbohydrates, that's also going to cause more fluid retention, again, more bloating. And then if we're also having a very high salt or high sodium diet, so eating a lot of processed foods, a lot of fast foods, this can also contribute and worsen to bloating. When it comes to air, as I mentioned, if we're chewing gum, if we're drinking a lot of carbonated beverages, it's all going to contribute to more air filling our stomach. One really big one, and this is going to sound super, super silly, but a lot of times we're eating too fast and we're swallowing too much air in the process of chewing. When we are chewing our food, we want to make sure that we are chewing it to an applesauce-like consistency before swallowing, but we also want to make sure that we are not shoveling that food down, faster than it takes to even make it. I think it's always funny, if you're the cook of the family, or if you're someone who cooks for yourself a lot, or family members, or significant other, it takes a decent amount of time to prep a recipe, to cook a recipe, and then to put it on the plate. And then if we think about how long we actually spend eating that meal, usually it's like 10 minutes or less. So we'll talk about this more when we talk about what we can be doing to decrease bloat. But just realize it's really, really important to slow down and chew your food. It can make a world of difference on its own. The last one is a little bit more complicated. So this is gas. Within our microbiome, there are bacteria that produce certain gases. So for example, there are bacteria that produce hydrogen gas, there are bacteria that produce methane gas, and there are bacteria that produce hydrogen sulfide gas. Now, this is important if you've ever heard the term SIBO before, which is an overgrowth of bacteria in your small intestine. There are three types of SIBO: hydrogen, methane, or hydrogen sulfide. And this depends on the type of gas that is being produced by the bacteria present. But the same thing applies to our microbiome as a whole. If we have a lot of these, let's say, methane producing species, we're going to have an excess amount of methane producing gas. High levels of methane often contribute to constipation, whereas high levels of hydrogen producing bacteria often contribute more to looser bowels or diarrhea. And then when it comes to hydrogen sulfide, this can be a mix of both, but usually it's associated with very unpleasant rotten egg smelling gas. So if you ever notice an increase in gas that smells really awful, that can be a big indicator that we've got an overgrowth or overproduction of hydrogen sulfide gas being produced by certain bacteria species. Okay, so I mentioned upper belly bloat versus lower belly bloat. There is a big difference between the two. When we're talking about upper belly bloat, we're thinking more of like our rib cage area. So our rib cage or right below our rib cage. When we're talking about lower belly bloat, we're talking more kind of below the belly button. So more of a distension in that lower half of your stomach region. What causes each one of these? So upper belly bloat, starting with this, a big one, like I mentioned, swallowing too much air. So that could be not chewing your food, carbonated beverages, gum, all of the above. Another really big one is going to be low stomach acid. Stomach acid is something I could talk about stomach acid for hours, but a lot of times when we are having things like reflux symptoms, we assume automatically that it's too much or overproduction of stomach acid. But a lot of times it can actually be related to too little stomach acid. So stomach acid gets this bad reputation, but it's actually super, super important for digestion. If we don't have enough stomach acid, first of all, we're not going to properly break down that food, but we also need stomach acid in order to absorb certain nutrients like our B vitamins and iron. We need it to properly break down protein. So if you have low stomach acid, you might find that high protein meals make you feel very, very uncomfortable. And then last but not least, the production of stomach acid actually chemically signals to our pancreas to release digestive enzymes, which are needed to further break down the food and actually absorb the nutrients. So if stomach acid is too low, it can almost cause this domino effect where it can impact all of these other areas of digestion. Not to mention, it's also a line of defense. Our stomach acid typically will help to kill off bacteria, viruses, things along those lines before it can enter into our small intestine. So it helps to protect our immune system. Other causes of upper belly bloat, things like gastritis, which is inflammation of the stomach. This could be caused from a number of things, even stress. Stress is a really big contributor to low stomach acid and to gastritis. And then gastroparesis, which is essentially when food is emptying too slow out of the stomach. Now, lower belly bloat, on the other hand, again, we're talking below the belly button line. This could be caused more from constipation, poor motility. It could be SIBO or SIFO. So again, that's an overgrowth of either bacteria or fungus into the small intestine. It could be a histamine intolerance. So certain bacteria in our gut are going to play a big role when it comes to histamines, which are common allergy triggers. It could be leaky gut. So leaky gut, you probably heard this term on social media. Essentially, our gut lining is held together nice and tight through these tight junctions. It keeps things in our gut or in our digestive system or digestive tract that are supposed to be there, and then it keeps everything else out. When leaky gut occurs, usually from dysbiosis or from inflammation, those tight junctions, they start to separate. And what happens is these undigested food particles and bacteria, they sneak through our gut lining and they get to where they're not supposed to be. So this can cause a pretty big immune response. It can cause a lot of those common gas and bloating symptoms. Pancreatic sufficiency or insufficiency is another one. Your pancreas produces digestive enzymes. Again, digestive enzymes are needed to actually break down the food. So lower belly bloat a lot of times is more microbiome specific. So we're talking about, the bacteria, parasites, fungal overgrowth, things along those lines. So what can we do to optimize digestion? Let's break it down before eating, during our meal, and then after eating. Before eating. So nervous system regulation. This is going to sound kind of silly and kind of woo-woo, but it is super important for digestion. If you've ever noticed that maybe one day you could sit down, I'm going to make this up, but let's say you have a bowl of pasta. You might eat that pasta and you might feel absolutely fine. 2 days later, you might sit down, you might have that exact same bowl of pasta, but maybe today you are more stressed. Something happened at work, something happened at home. Either way, you're feeling more overwhelmed. All of a sudden, you eat that bowl of pasta and your stomach hurts as a result. And you're confused because you said, 2 days ago, I ate this exact same meal and I felt fine. Why do I not feel fine now? A lot of times that comes down to that nervous system state that we're in. So we have our parasympathetic and then we have our sympathetic nervous system. So essentially, parasympathetic is going to be rest and digest, and then sympathetic is going to be fight and flight. When our body is in a relaxed state, we are able to optimize digestion. Our body does what it's supposed to do. Motility is working, enzyme production is occurring. But when we switch into that sympathetic state, which is fight and flight, our body is trying to respond to whatever stimulus is causing the stress. And as a result, it's going to downregulate digestion. So decreases enzyme production. It can decrease or actually increase stomach acid production. It slows motility. It's the perfect storm for stomach problems. So one thing that you can do before your meal to help essentially stimulate your vagus nerve, which is that highway of communication between your brain and your gut, is to practice something called diaphragmatic breathing. When we're doing diaphragmatic breathing, what we're doing is we are breathing in through our nose for about 6 seconds. We are holding for about 6 seconds. We are breathing out through our mouth for about 6 seconds. And then we are holding our breath for another 6 seconds and we're repeating that 3 to 5 times. We want to focus on breathing through our diaphragm. So when we're breathing, sometimes putting your hand right on your stomach can be super helpful so you can feel each breath as we're taking it. This is going to help, again, get our body into a more relaxed state, and that's going to help us to eat and promote better digestion. Another thing that we can do is introduce different bitter teas or tinctures. So there are something called digestive bitters. You can get the spray form or you can get the form that you drop onto your tongue. We'll talk about this when it comes to supplements, but digestive bitters are one of my favorite hacks. Bitter foods and bitter herbs are going to help to stimulate the production of stomach acid and digestive juices before we even sit down and eat the meal. So we can use these about 10 to 15 minutes before eating, again, to help get our body prepared for the meal that we're about to have. Teas, things like dandelion root or chamomile tea, can also have the same benefit. So sipping on something like that, again, 10 to 15 minutes before our meal, can help to optimize digestion. Now let's transition to during the meal. Number one, our posture. If we are sitting, let's say on a couch and watching TV, we tend to have our shoulders super slumped over. We don't want that. If you think about the alignment in terms of posture, we want everything to be nice and straight from our stomach up to our esophagus and our mouth where the food is entering. So we want to make sure we're sitting, we want to make sure our back is straight, and we want to make sure we're not slumping over. The next one, I mentioned this before, chewing our food. Food should be an applesauce-like consistency before we actually swallow it. This is especially important for harder to digest foods like steak or tough cuts of meat or even fibrous veggies. So applesauce-like consistency. Next up is going to be avoiding swallowing excess amounts of water or drinking a lot during your meals. A lot of people will chug a glass of water at the beginning of the meal or chug a glass of water at the end, and that is not ideal because a lot of water is going to dilute stomach acid. And again, we need stomach acid in order to digest our food. So 15 minutes before, during, and after, we want to make sure that we are limiting our fluids to about 1/2 cup to maybe a 3/4 cup at max. And then we want to focus on hydrating in between our meals. Last but not least, just being more mindful in the eating process. We just live in a kind of world that's go, go, go. A lot of times we're eating breakfast on the go, we're eating lunch at work while we are sitting at the desk, maybe at dinner, we're eating it at home. But the goal is just to be more mindful across the board. We want to be aware of our hunger and fullness cues. The more we disregard those, the less effective our body becomes at actually recognizing when we're hungry and when we're full, and that can lead to overeating. So again, just being mindful, slowing down, chewing our food. If you have a really hard time slowing down and you're like, I just am a fast eater, I can't help it. One kind of trick that you can do that I found to be super helpful is set a timer on your phone. The first time you do it, just put the phone down, don't look at it, see how long it takes you to actually eat the meal. You might be pleasantly surprised. Maybe it's taking you 15, 20 minutes, or maybe you're eating your meal in less than 5 and you don't even realize it. Next time you sit down, try to add a minute to whatever time. So this time when you set the timer, look at the timer, and a lot of times just visually seeing that change in the time and visually looking at the clock will be enough to actually make you slow down and acknowledge how fast that you're eating. As a goal, I usually say to aim for about 15 to 20 minutes per meal. I know it's not always possible. You don't need to sit down and spend an hour eating, but if we're spreading it out over 15 minutes at least, generally we're on the right path with that one. Last but not least, after eating. So first of all, incorporating some kind of movement. Movement is going to stimulate digestion. My favorite thing to do is go for a 10 or 15-minute walk. I don't recommend doing any high intensity cardio exercise or anything along those lines, but we just want some gentle movement. So going for a walk, yoga, stretching, whatever it might be. After eating too, just acknowledging hunger cues, checking in on symptoms. If you are struggling with digestive issues, I think it's really important to pay attention to when you start to notice the symptoms and how long they last. If you're noticing symptoms like 15, 20 minutes after you're eating, then we know it's occurring more in your stomach and your small intestine versus if the symptoms pop up an hour and a half later, it's probably more lower microbiome related. So we can learn a lot just from paying attention to how you're feeling after your meals. All right, building a balanced meal to support optimal digestion. Let's chat about it. So first of all, we have to nourish our gut for it to heal and function. One problem I have with social media is that I think it started to promote a very, very restrictive diet in terms of gut health. You could Google gut health diet and you might find gluten-free, dairy-free, sugar-free, all processed food-free, nightshade-free. If you try to follow all of that, you are not only going to restrict your diet to the point that you are not nourishing your body, but you're also going to probably drive yourself crazy and it's not going to be sustainable long term. There is no single diet out there that is the perfect diet for everyone. And that's one thing that I want to emphasize. I'm going to teach you how to build a balanced meal, but the specifics of what you're putting in that balanced meal are going to be different based on how you feel. And again, this is why it's so important to check in with your symptoms. I could, eat broccoli all day and be fine, but then you might try eating broccoli and it might make you feel very uncomfortable. So just remember, just because you're seeing what works for someone on social media does not mean that it's necessarily going to be what works best for your body. And that's where, again, listening to your body, keeping track of these foods, checking in with your symptoms is going to come into play. All right, so what are the components of a gut nourishing meal? So number one, we have got our carbohydrates. Carbohydrates get a bad reputation, but we need them in order to function, especially for our brain. Carbohydrates are going to provide a source of energy. Carbohydrates also contain fiber, depending on the type of carb, and fiber can be helpful when it comes to constipation prevention. Now, there's an idea of what is healthy versus what is healthy for a sensitive stomach. If you are someone who is like, everything makes me bloat, I am not comfortable, my gut is a mess, I actually recommend lower fiber carbs. So instead of doing something like quinoa, you might want white jasmine rice. You might not want a sprouted grain bread. You might want something like sourdough instead. The easier it is to digest, the less symptoms you're probably going to experience. And it's not to say that this is your forever diet, but until we get your digestive issues under control and we figure out that root cause and we treat that root cause, easy to digest is the name of the game. So don't feel like, if you're struggling with digestive issues, you need to sit down and have, 12 sprouted grain bread. Probably not going to make you feel the best compared to something like sourdough or just a plain old white bread. When it comes to our fruits and vegetables, we know that fiber is great for the gut. We know that plant diversity is key to microbiome diversity, which is key to overall health. So we do want to be focusing on introducing lots of veggies, lots of fresh produce into our diet. If you have a sensitive stomach, stay away from raw vegetables. They are not going to be your friend. It's a lot of roughage, especially if you are someone who might have SIBO, high fiber, lots of fruits and veggies, not going to make you feel very good. Usually sticking with very well-cooked options. So things like cooked carrots, cooked green beans, rainbow-colored peppers, all of that's going to be super helpful. One thing I do want you to focus, though, when it comes to fruits and veggies is getting variety, getting a lot of different colors in there. Different colors are going to contain different prebiotics, which are going to feed different bacteria in our microbiome. So the more diverse our diet is in terms of types of produce, the better or the healthier our microbiome is going to be. And this doesn't mean you need to go out and introduce and try 1,001 new foods, but it could be as simple as instead of getting orange carrots, getting rainbow carrots. Instead of getting red tomatoes, getting the mixed cherry tomatoes. Instead of, buying, let's say, just frozen corn, maybe we're buying frozen corn, peas, and carrots mixed together. So we don't need to overcomplicate it. There's lots of ways that we can increase diversity without reinventing the wheel. Next up is protein. So protein plays a really big role with gut integrity. Our gut lining, we need to have enough protein in our diet in order to keep that gut lining nice and strong. So if we're eating a very low protein diet, that's going to impact leaky gut or intestinal permeability. We also need protein in order to produce digestive enzymes. So if we're not getting enough protein, our pancreas is not going to sufficiently produce digestive enzymes to actually digest the food that we're eating. General rule of thumb, and this is going to differ from person to person, so do not hold me to this, but we want to be aiming for at least 100 grams of protein per day. If you are a male or you are a larger person, you might need more than this. Sometimes you might need less than this, but if you are an active person, if you're weight training, we definitely need at least 100 grams of protein per day. So if we broke this down per meal, that's like 25 to 30 grams of protein per meal, and then having some type of higher protein snack in there as well. Portion size wise, if you think about, chicken or seafood or, beef, the size of the palm of your hand, if you go a little bit larger than that, and it will depend on the size of your hand too, but cooked portion will usually be about 30 grams. And that's what we want to aim for as, again, a general rule of thumb. Last but not least, we've got our healthy fats. Big fan of healthy fats. These are going to be super, super important for reducing inflammation. So if we've got a lot of inflammation in our gut, incorporating more of a Mediterranean style diet, getting more of those healthy fats is going to be a great way to reduce inflammation. It's also super important for women in terms of hormone health. A lot of times, if we're going lower fat, it can actually stop the production of certain hormones, which is going to impact your menstrual cycle. So I can't emphasize enough, fat is your friend, fat is not to be feared. We need fat in our diet. That being said, the quality of the fat is going to make a big difference. If we're getting our fat from trans fat in potato chips, it's going to have the opposite effect of what we want it to on our body. If we're getting our fats from things like nuts and seeds and ground flax seeds and chia seeds and fatty fish and olives, these are all very anti-inflammatory fats. They're going to be rich in omega-3s, and that is what we're aiming for. General rule of thumb, we want about 100 to 200 calories, about 10 to 20 grams coming from healthy fats in every single meal. Healthy fats are going to also help to keep you full. So if you feel like you're struggling to stay full in between your meals, trying to incorporate more fats, more protein is going to make a really big difference. So just an example of some what I would consider very well-balanced meals. So here it looks like we've got a steak, we've got some microgreens there, we've got potatoes, we've got mushrooms, we've got color here, we've got carbohydrates, fats, proteins, checking off all of the boxes. Another example, avocado toast. We've got some type of bread there. We've got avocado, which is healthy fat and fiber. We've got spinach, and then we've got eggs for protein. So your meal doesn't need to look like a boring, chicken, rice, and, broccoli in a meal prep container and eating the same thing every day. We can get super creative with this. And in doing so, we can make eating very enjoyable, but also very sustainable when it comes to digestive health. All right. With that, we are going to dive into supplements. So this is just kind of a disclaimer about the importance of quality when it comes to supplements. The supplement industry is a very, very wealthy industry, and unfortunately, it is not very regulated. So people can make claims on supplements, they can put what they want into their supplements, and no one's really regulating it until it becomes so serious of an issue that, government has to get involved with it. It's also important to understand what form of nutrients we're taking because they are not all created equal. So just to give you an example, folic acid, and I'm going to use this because I did a lot of research on this when I was looking for a prenatal. There are a lot of different forms of folic acid. The activated form is L5-methyl-TH4. That being said, we need to consider that there could be other forms in these vitamins that are not as effective in terms of absorption. So you want to make sure you're taking the right form of the vitamin. There are a lot of cheaper forms that companies will use to make the product cost less, but it's going to be far less effective when it comes to actually doing the job that it's supposed to be doing in your body. I always like to look for third-party testing. If you see at the bottom of the screen here, these are just a couple of the third-party testing labels that you can look for when you're buying supplements. So essentially, this is saying that this company chose to pay for additional testing to ensure that what you're getting in the product is actually what says on the label. So you want to make sure if you're paying for a supplement, you're giving this company money, you are actually getting what you were supposed to be getting, and that's where the third-party testing can come in. The other thing that I wanted to add is that just because you see a supplement on social media does not mean that you need to take it. It is very easy to get overwhelmed. There are so many supplements out there, especially right now in the gut health space and in the hormone space, that it can be very overwhelming thinking that you need to take every single supplement out there. And even the supplements that I'm going to share with you now, it does not mean that you need to take these. There is a reason to take certain supplements, and I do use supplements a lot in my practice, but there's a time and a place to take them, and we don't need to be taking 1,001 things. I also will add that it's also not great for our bodies to be taking 1,001 different supplements. It's a lot for our bodies to process, and it's not always healthy. So we just want to be mindful. We want to take supplements that have a purpose, and we don't want to overdo it. We also don't want to spend hundreds of dollars every single month on supplements. So just some things to be mindful of. All right, so digestive bitters. We talked about this a little bit when we talked about what we can be doing before our meals to optimize digestion. So Better Bitters is a really great one. Herb Farm is another company that has them. There are tons of different companies out there that produce different bitter blends. But what you do is if you're doing the dropper, you are taking about 1/4 of a teaspoon, you're swirling it on your tongue for about 10 to 15 seconds until you start to salivate. And you're doing this about 10 minutes before you start your meal. Like I mentioned before, bitters help to stimulate the production of digestive juices and stomach acid. So this is going to help to better prepare your body for the food that is coming its way. As a disclaimer, bitters are very, very bitter. It is not for everyone. I kind of like the bitter taste and the bitter flavor, so I don't mind it at all. But I have had some people who have tried bitters and have spit it all out as soon as they put it in their mouth. So just realize that, like the name implies, it is a bitter tincture. So just be prepared for that one. Next up, we have got colostrum. So you've probably seen colostrum on social media now. I'd say the last like 6 to 12 months, it has blown up. There are so many companies now producing colostrum. Again, quality is super important. If we think about the difference between a whole grain versus like a white product in terms of nutrients, the white product tends to be stripped of a lot of those nutrients that the whole grain still has. The same thing can go from colostrum. A lot of companies kind of give you the stripped down version. And so again, quality is really important. Sovereign Lab makes a great one. I'm trying to think of some other ones. Cowboy colostrum is another really good one right now that's on the market. If you ever want recommendations, you can send me a message, an email, or a DM on Instagram, and I can give you brand recommendations. But why do I love colostrum, and why do I think colostrum is actually worth the hype when it comes to digestive health? So first of all, it's really rich in immunoglobulins. It's also rich in something called lactoferrin. These are going to help to support our immune system. So if I ever run a GI map and I see that secretory IgA, which is a measure of immune function, is low, we are immediately either going on something called mega IgG or we're going on colostrum. Colostrum is dairy-based, so if you have a dairy sensitivity, you do not want to take this, and you'd want to use something like mega IgG instead. It's also going to help support tight junction integrity, which if you remember, this is what helps to essentially prevent and heal leaky gut. It's also going to help to reduce inflammation. And then last but not least, it actually acts as a prebiotic to feed the beneficial bacteria in our gut. So a lot of different benefits of colostrum. You can take it in the capsule form. You can also take it in the powdered form. I generally prefer powdered just because you got to take a heck of a lot of capsules to get the same amount as, a scoop of the powder. If you're struggling with a lot of digestive issues, usually I recommend doing it twice per day. So AM and PM, you do want to take it on an empty stomach, so at least 20 minutes before your meal. Otherwise, I'm not too particular with the timing. And again, if you've got stomach issues, taking it twice per day. If you're feeling overall pretty good and you want it more for just preventative benefits, you only really need to be taking it once per day. Next one, omega-3. So this goes with my whole rant about healthy fats and how important they are. Sometimes, even if we are getting a lot of healthy fats in our diet, we do need a little extra boost. So especially if we're dealing with an inflammatory condition like IBD, so like colitis or Crohn's, omega-3 can be a really good addition in terms of supplements. So it's going to help to decrease gut inflammation. It also promotes brain and heart health, which is a bonus, and it's going to support the intestinal lining. You can do capsules or liquid. Both of them are effective, but quality, again, super, super, super important. What you want to look for specifically on the nutrition label is EPA and DHA. This is where we're actually going to get the benefit from the omega-3. There are a lot of companies out there that might say, oh, it's got 3,000 milligrams of omega-3 in it. But if you actually look at the amount of EPA and DHA, it's very, very low. And this is just a way to make the product much cheaper. Nordic Naturals is a fantastic brand. Carlson's is also great. Now Foods makes a really great omega-3 as well. Only other thing I'll mention with omega-3, if you are someone who has an omega-3 supplement that maybe has been sitting in your cabinet for the last 2 years and you take it on occasion when you remember, I need you to get that and just throw it in the trash because it's probably expired and we don't want to be taking a rancid fish oil. If we're doing that, then it's actually going to do the opposite of what we want it to do, and it's going to increase free radicals, increase inflammation. So make sure to check those expiration dates. It's really important. Also, if you are storing it, we don't want to store it in a super hot temperature because heat can increase the expiration date as well. So just something to be mindful of, something to be careful about. All right, multivitamin. Multivitamin, think of this as your insurance policy. There are going to be days, there are going to be weeks, there could even be months where maybe we are not eating the most optimal or ideal diet. It also could be digestive related. If we are struggling to tolerate a lot of foods, if our diet is very, very limited, we're probably not getting all the nutrients that we need from food alone. And that's where taking a multivitamin can be very effective. Again, the form of the nutrients is important, especially for a multivitamin. Mega Food is one that I really like because it's coming from whole food sources. Needed is another really great brand. They have a good multivitamin, a good prenatal. There's a lot of good brands out there. Again, if you need brand recommendations, just let me know. All right, the last one that we're going to talk about is magnesium. So magnesium, when we run micronutrient panels, magnesium pops up as low. I would say like 90% of the time. It is just a nutrient we tend to be very deficient in, and it's a very important nutrient and a very important electrolyte. There are a lot of different forms of magnesium out there. There is citrate, glycinate, malate. I could go on. Different forms are going to have different benefits. So it is important to make sure that we're taking the right form for the job, essentially. Citrate is really great if you're not using the bathroom regularly. So magnesium citrate is effective essentially at promoting more regular bowel movements, but it's not one you necessarily want to be taking long term. My favorite form of magnesium is going to be magnesium glycinate or magnesium biglycinate. So this is really great. It also is going to help with bowel movements, but it helps to reduce stress and anxiety, and it can also promote more restful sleep. If you struggle to fall asleep at night, one thing that you can do is make a little evening mocktail, mix in some magnesium biglycinate, mix it in with a little bit of tart cherry juice, and it can be a great way to help you unwind in the evening. So with these, dose dependent on the supplement and the strength, so always just make sure you're following the instructions. When it comes to supplements, I'm never super particular with where you get them, but I do always suggest trying to be more careful when it comes to Amazon. Amazon does not always regulate storage temperatures if it's being stored in one of their storage warehouses. And so, like I said, expiration dates can be significantly decreased if it's not stored in the correct temperature. But also, there is a lot of copycat brands out there. And so we just want to be careful. There was a lawsuit in New Jersey, I believe a year and a half ago. There was a guy who's been selling supplements on Amazon, some really popular names, and he was essentially just putting a white powder in them and labeling them as different supplements and selling them. And he'd been doing it for 10 years and making lots of money off of it. And the supplements were doing absolutely nothing. So we just want to be careful with where we're getting them. Full Script is what I use with clients. It is essentially like an Amazon, but meant for supplements. So the supplements are coming directly from the individual suppliers, but it's all through this organization called Full Script. Full Script has pretty much every supplement out there. I have a link to it in my bio on Instagram and on TikTok. So you can go into the Full Script store and you do get 10% off all supplements on there. Another great alternative is just to buy them locally or buy them directly through the website. So buying them directly through Thorne or directly through Now Foods or whatever other supplement you might be using. So that is my spiel on supplements to kind of summarize the ones that I most frequently use. But again, like I said, just because I'm mentioning them here does not mean that you specifically need to be taking them. With that, I wanted to open it up to questions. If anyone has anything that they've been thinking about, anything that popped up, feel free to unmute yourself right now and we can just have an open conversation with everything that we've gone over.
I have one question.
Go ahead.
I feel